Hey, I'm Dr. Lindsay Merrill with Eyes of a Human, and today we're talking about digestion. Now, a lot of us have issues with our digestion like gas, bloating, constipation or loose stools, diarrhea, reflux. There's so many things that can go wrong with our digestion. But if you want to fix this, you need to understand how good digestion works, and then you can understand the process that's breaking down and causing your GI symptoms. So the part we're most familiar with digestion is you eat food and you chew it up and you make some saliva and then you swallow it. Once that food hits your stomach, you need to make stomach acid to break down the protein part of that food. That's where you also extract things like iron and B12. So when that food's in your stomach, then it passes on to the small intestine. Once it enters the small intestine, you secrete pancreatic enzymes that help neutralize that stomach acid so it doesn't burn your small intestine, and also to break down the carbohydrate portion of your food. You also secrete bile from the liver. Bile helps emulsify fats and makes them small particles so you can absorb them better. It's also a major way that we get rid of toxins from the body. Then the food has to pass through your small intestine, and where it's absorbed, all those little pieces you broke down get absorbed by your microvilli. After it's time in the small intestine, your food goes to the large intestine, or the colon, where our bacteria there help break down some of the fibers and create healthy molecules like short-chain fatty acids that feed our colon cells. And it also pulls out extra water, and then it firms up your stool so it actually looks like what you're used to pooping out. So that's what a healthy digestive system looks like. But if any one of those parts breaks down, you're gonna have symptoms. So for instance, let's say you're somebody who has an irritated colon, and so food just passes, or your bowels just squeeze all that stuff out. Well, you're not gonna have time to absorb the water, and you're gonna end up with loose stools. However, you could also end up with loose stools if you're secreting too much bile, because too much bile is a bowel accelerant. And so even though it's the same symptom, you have diarrhea or loose stool, it could be very different causes. And so what I like to do is a very thorough investigation using a stool test to figure out, to kind of tease out what parts of the digestion are going wrong. And then when you know what's wrong, it's pretty easy to address it and fix it. Alright, so to help you further understand what I mean when I say that you can have the same symptom but multiple different causes, I have an example stool test here, and we're going to walk through it. I'm going to kind of show you where some of the different symptoms come in with the different causes. So the first thing you can see here is you've got your kind of rainbow of green to red, and this is the microbiome, or the bacteria that were grown out of somebody's stool sample that they sent in. And the first thing we notice here are all of these good or beneficial flora. These are the bacteria that you want in your intestines. They do really important things for us. They help us do things like make vitamin K, make those short-chain fatty acids from our fiber that we eat. And they also keep out bad bacteria that cause symptoms. And so for this patient, for instance, they're missing this Enterococcus species and they're missing lactobacillus. And so they're really missing two of those major players here. And so this might be somebody who has mild constipation, especially since some of these bacteria are more local to the colon. The other thing we notice on this patient is that they have some of these commensal bacteria. Now, these are your neutral players. They're not helping you, but they're not hurting you. And they can be an issue when you start having more of these neutral bacteria than you have of your actual good bacteria. This patient sample did not have any straight up bad bacteria or dysbiotic flora. However, sometimes you will see some, like certain strains of Klebsiella, and those are very much responsible for abdominal pain. And so that's always on my radar if somebody has any actual like tenderness that they come in complaining of. That can be a major player there. Sometimes these bacteria are also a cause of really bad gas. You'll see that as well. So the next section here is the yeast. Yeast is really hard to grow in a dish. It's what we call fastidious, and so it's often not cultured out. However, they also look under the microscope, and in this patient they saw rare yeast in the stool, so that's not too bad. Now, yeast symptoms can be, I've seen very severe constipation, like pooping once a week, once every other week. I've also seen extreme diarrhea and really bad gas that I think the patient quoted could clear a golf course. And so yeast can be anywhere on the spectrum, but oftentimes you'll see things like sugar cravings and brain fog and even anxiety that come along with the yeast. And that can be other clues you can use to tell you what's going on there. And is this rare yeast a big issue for this patient? So on this page, this is the ova and parasite examination. This we did 3 times, and no parasites were seen on any of the samples. And again, there was just that rare yeast there. Sometimes here you're gonna see things like white blood cells, which would tell you the immune system is angry. Red blood cells, which would be micro damage to your intestines, so that can be a reflection of small bowel inflammation. And of course, if there's any parasites, those will all show up here. This bottom area here, it tests for frank pathogens that are also mandatorily reported. This patient didn't have any, so we're not too worried about that. Most people don't have it. I have had patients that did have chronic giardia though, and they were symptomatic. All right, so this is where things get really fun. We look at our digestive function. And so when somebody says that they have difficulties with certain types of food, or they can't handle protein, or they don't do lots of carbs, this is another area that could be responsible. So elastase is a pancreatic enzyme that's responsible for breaking down carbohydrates. This could be the cause of your bloating if you don't have enough elastase. Fat stains are seen if you don't make enough or good quality bile. You won't be able to absorb all those fats you're eating. And so if you're not absorbing all your fats, that can sometimes actually make your stool float. You might see some grease stains on the water as well, but it can also just give you loose stools. Not having enough bile would make you tend towards constipation. So now you guys can start to see it's really important to look at these actual numbers because diarrhea and constipation can be caused by many different things. Sometimes it's too much, sometimes it's too little. Muscle fibers are a reflection of if you're making enough stomach acid. Vegetable fibers usually come up rare, and that's fine. You will have a lot of fibers that you can't break down. And then carbohydrates, those should all be absorbed in the small intestine, and so that would be another reflection of small bowel inflammation. This next section here is all looking for inflammation. You do not want inflammation in your intestines. That puts you on the spectrum and puts you going towards something like an inflammatory bowel disease, which is a really serious autoimmune condition. And so it's really good to have these markers all within range. However, you do see 1 or 2 of these starting to go out of the range. It's a good indication that some of your GI symptoms might be coming from a little bit more general inflammation, and you're somebody who might do very well with not taking digestive enzymes or a probiotic necessarily, but really trying to figure out where that inflammation is coming from, and using anti-inflammatories like curcumin and vitamin C and some of those other things to calm down that inflammation. The last marker here is called secretory IgA. This is part of your immune system, and it's telling us what is your immune system doing in the gut. With this particular patient being at 8.8, that's very, very low. And so this is somebody who's had bowel issues for a long time. This is a chronic GI issue, and there's immune depletion. This also tells me that whatever is going on in the immune system, it does not like what we saw on that first page with the microbiome, with the bacteria and the yeast, and that it's really draining this person's body. This is somebody who is going to have GI issues along with other systemic things like fatigue. All right, and this box here is looking at those short chain fatty acids. This is made from your good bacteria and the fiber you make, or the fiber you eat, sorry. And so if you don't have enough good bacteria, or if you don't have enough fiber in your diet, these numbers are going to be out of range. Some of these are really important, like these 2 are a reflection of heart health. Butyrate can be a reflection of colon health, and so they have systemic effects in our whole body. And this is how, one of the ways, your digestive tract can impact the health of your entire body. And so we always look at here, these numbers here, and do things to make sure that we're thinking about your whole body. We're thinking about brain health and cardiac health. This box here is looking for bleeding. Bleeding is never a good thing, but particularly it can be something that can be used to determine if you need further investigation, like a colonoscopy, to rule out things like GI or colon cancer. pH is a reflection mostly of if you're eating enough fiber and that fermentation process is happening, but it can also be a reflection of your transit time. If your stool is moving through your intestines too quickly, that pH will be much lower. I've also seen yeast actually shift that pH quite low. The last box here that I want to talk about then is the color and the consistency. Most people have brown and soft stool, but consistency can tell us whether you're having hard dry stools or a little bit looser stools, which can be a reflection of the diet as well as the microbiome. And then color can be a reflection of the diet as well, but also things like bile secretion. If you don't secrete enough bile, your stool will not be a nice dark brown color. It'll be a little bit closer to blonde, and that can be a big issue. Okay, so hopefully that explanation gave you a little bit better idea of what I'm looking for and why GI issues can be so difficult to fix. So to bring it all together for you, I want to give you an example of a patient. So this patient came in and they're having reflux and they're also having lower abdominal pain, especially on the right side. And so we ran a stool test. And one of the things that came up is they had muscle fibers that were seen in their stool. So muscle fibers indicates that this patient was not making enough stomach acid to break down those proteins, and that's what was causing their reflux. And so we used hydrochloric acid and bitters to address that part of their digestion, as well as some stress relief techniques to help improve overall digestion. And then for the lower abdominal pain, this patient came up positive for blastocystis hominis, which is a very, very common parasite that we have in the US. And that's known for causing diarrhea and also or alternating diarrhea, constipation, and also lower abdominal pain, especially on the right side, which is where it lives in the colon. And so for this patient, we did a round of herbs along with heavy doses of probiotics and immune support like immunoglobulins to really make sure that we were boosting their immune system. It took a several month treatment course, but this patient did make a full recovery and now has no reflux, no abdominal pain.